You finally found it. The audiobook that disappeared from libraries was pulled from shelves and has been quietly passed between seekers for generations. In the next 4 hours, I'm going to share every page, every secret, every life-changing truth they didn't want you to discover. By the end, you'll understand why your searching has felt so endless and how it ends today. You'll never see your struggles the same way again. You found this audiobook because something inside you refused to give up. You've been searching maybe for years through self-help books, spiritual teachers, therapy, success strategies, relationship advice. You've had glimpses of peace, moments of clarity, but they always fade. You're tired of temporary fixes and ready for something real. This isn't another technique to try. This is the map that shows you where you actually are and reveals you've been home all along. In the next 4 hours, you'll understand why nothing external could ever fill the void, how to access the peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, and most importantly, how to recognize the divine presence that's been waiting patiently within you. You'll walk away knowing how to find God not in churches or books, but in your own awakened heart, not as belief, but as direct experience. Not someday, but right now. Let me start with a story that changed everything for me. There was once a lighthouse keeper who lived alone on a rocky island. Every night, he would scan the horizon with his telescope, searching desperately for ships in distress. He had devoted his entire life to this mission, convinced that somewhere out there, vessels were struggling in the darkness, needing his help. Years passed. The keeper grew older, more tired, but he never stopped searching. His eyes strained, his back ached from hunching over that telescope, but still he looked and looked and looked. He kept detailed journals of his searches, marking every wave pattern, every cloud formation, every shadow that might hide a ship in trouble. His entire identity became wrapped up in this mission of rescue. The keeper's isolation grew deeper with each passing year. He spoke to no one except the occasional supply boat that visited monthly. His world consisted entirely of watching, waiting, searching. He developed elaborate theories about where ships might be hiding, sophisticated methods for scanning different sections of the horizon, complex systems for cataloging his observations. Yet despite all his dedication, all his expertise, all his sacrifice, he never found a single ship to save. The keeper's journals filled dozens of volumes over the decades, page after page of meticulous observations, detailed weather reports, careful notes about ocean conditions and visibility. He became the world's leading expert on the waters around his island, but that expertise only deepened his sense of failure. He knew everything about these waters except how to find the ships he was certain needed saving. Some nights, when storms made observation impossible, the keeper would pace his lighthouse frantically, consumed with worry about the vessels he couldn't see. What if a ship was foundering just beyond his vision? What if his failure to spot them meant lives were lost? The weight of imagined responsibility crushed him. He barely slept, rarely ate, lived in constant anxiety about his perceived inadequacy. The keeper developed elaborate backup systems, multiple telescopes, oil lamps for emergency signaling, detailed maps marking every possible shipping route. He created schedules for maximum coverage, dividing each night into sectors to ensure no area went unobserved for more than 15 minutes. His lighthouse became a fortress of surveillance equipment and rescue preparation. But still, night after night, year after year, no ships appeared in his sights. The keeper began to believe he was fundamentally flawed, that some essential quality required for ship spotting was missing in him. Maybe his eyes weren't sharp enough. His dedication wasn't pure enough. His methods weren't sophisticated enough. He read every maritime rescue manual he could find, studied the techniques of legendary lighthouse keepers, consulted with experts about optimal observation methods. One particularly violent storm night, after 27 years of fruitless searching, the keeper finally collapsed in his chair. His newest telescope, the most powerful he had ever owned, fell from his trembling hands and shattered on the floor. His logbooks scattered across the room, pages of careful observations mixing with the wind and rain that poured through his open window. As he sat there in the darkness, feeling like the biggest failure who ever lived, something caught his eye. A brilliant beam of light was cutting through the storm, steady and sure, guiding ships safely to harbor. For a moment, he thought another lighthouse had been built nearby without his knowledge. He staggered to his window to see where this miraculous light was coming from. And then he realized something that changed his entire understanding of life. The light wasn't coming from some distant ship or another lighthouse. It was coming from his own lighthouse. For 27 years, While he had been desperately searching for ships to save, his own light had been automatically turning on every single night, guiding countless vessels safely home. He was not the searcher. He was the light. Standing there in the storm, rain pouring down his face, he began to laugh and cry at the same time. All those years of searching, all that suffering, all that sense of failure, and he had been the very thing he was looking for all along. Every ship that had passed safely in the night had been saved by his light, even while he was convinced he was failing in his mission. The keeper rushed down to the base of his lighthouse and found what he had never thought to look for evidence of his success. The rocky shore was marked with dozens of carved messages from grateful ship captains. Thank you for the light that saved us. Your beacon guided us home. Because of you, my crew lives to see their families. Message after message, year after year, testament to the lives saved by the very light he had taken for granted while searching desperately for purpose elsewhere. But the most profound realization was yet to come. The keeper understood that the light hadn't been working automatically. It had been turning on every night because he was there, because he cared, because he had devoted his life to service even though he didn't understand how that service was actually happening. His dedication to finding ships in distress had kept him present at the lighthouse every night, ensuring the light was maintained, the beacon was bright, the salvation was available for anyone who needed it. He had thought his job was to find ships to save. His actual job was to be the light that did the saving. He had thought he needed to go somewhere else, find something outside himself, achieve some special skill or insight. But everything necessary for his life's work had been within him all along, expressing itself through his simple commitment to showing up with love. This is your story. This is my story. This is the story of every human being who has ever felt lost, searching, incomplete. We spend our lives scanning the horizon for salvation, for purpose, for love, for peace, never realizing that we are the very thing we've been looking for. We think we need to find our light when we already are the light. We think we need to discover our purpose when our very existence is purposeful. We think we need to earn love when we are love itself, expressing in human form. But how did we forget? How did beings of infinite light convince themselves they were lost in darkness? Let me tell you about the great forgetting, because understanding how we got here is the first step to remembering who we really are. Imagine you're born into a world where everyone has amnesia. Not complete amnesia, but a very specific kind. Everyone has forgotten that they are divine beings having a human experience. Instead, they believe they are human beings desperately seeking a divine experience. This forgetting gets passed down through generations like a cultural inheritance, but it's not in our DNA. It's in our conditioning, our education, our social programming. From the moment you took your first breath, well-meaning people began teaching you who you were supposed to be. Your parents, shaped by their own conditioning, their own fears, their own forgotten divinity, began the unconscious process of helping you forget who you really were. Not because they wanted to harm you, but because they had forgotten themselves. They taught you that love was conditional. If you behaved well, if you met their expectations, if you made them proud, you received affection and approval. If you misbehaved, if you disappointed them, if you failed to meet their standards, love was withdrawn. Slowly, without anyone realizing it was happening, you learned that your worth depended on your performance. You began to believe that you had to earn the love that was actually your birthright. Your teachers, operating from the same unconscious, forgetting, reinforced these lessons day after day, year after year. They rewarded you for conforming, for getting the right answers, for fitting into predetermined categories and expectations. They punished you for being too creative, too questioning, too authentic, too much yourself. Without meaning to, they taught you that your natural way of being was somehow wrong, that you needed to become someone else to be acceptable. The education system itself was designed around this fundamental error. Instead of helping you discover your unique gifts and authentic expression, it tried to make you into a standardized product. Instead of nurturing your natural curiosity and creativity, it taught you to memorize information and regurgitate it on command. Instead of honoring your individual learning style and interests, it forced you into a one-size-fits-all approach that left most children feeling inadequate or misunderstood. Society continued the process through every institution and cultural message. Through media, through advertising, through the countless subtle and not-so-subtle messages that surrounded you every day, you learned that happiness came from external things. Success, relationships, possessions, achievements, status, recognition, these became the new gods you were taught to worship. You learned that you were incomplete as you were, That fulfillment was always just one more accomplishment away. The messages were everywhere and constant. Buy this product and you'll be happy. Achieve this goal and you'll be successful. Find this relationship and you'll be complete. Get this job and you'll be secure. Reach this milestone and you'll be worthy. The underlying assumption in all these messages was that you, as you are right now, are not enough. You need something external to make you whole, valuable, lovable, worthy of respect and happiness. Your peer groups reinforce the forgetting at every stage of development. In childhood, the kids who were different were often teased or excluded. In adolescence, the pressure to conform became even more intense. In adulthood, everyone around you was playing the same game of seeking, comparing, competing for limited resources and recognition. If you tried to step outside this pattern, if you suggested that maybe the seeking itself was the problem, you were met with confusion, resistance, or dismissal. It became easier to go along with the collective dream than to risk being seen as different, naive, or unrealistic. Even your religious institutions, which should have been reminding you of your divine nature, often contributed to the forgetting. Many taught you that God was separate from you, distant and difficult to reach. They emphasized your inherent sinfulness rather than your inherent divinity. They made salvation dependent on belief, behavior, or belonging rather than recognition of what you already are. They created hierarchies of spiritual authority that put intermediaries between you and the divine, instead of pointing you directly to the sacred presence within your own being. Mental health professionals, despite their good intentions, often pathologize normal human experiences of seeking and spiritual questioning. If you felt disconnected from material success, they might diagnose you with depression. If you questioned conventional reality, they might see signs of mental illness. If you had spontaneous spiritual experiences, they might prescribe medication to make them stop. The very experiences that could lead to awakening were often treated as symptoms to be eliminated. Layer by layer, year by year, decade by decade, you learned to hide your true nature beneath these expectations. You developed what psychologists call a false self, a carefully constructed personality designed to meet external demands rather than express authentic being. You became so skilled at playing this role, so invested in maintaining this identity, that you forgot it was a role at all. The false self became your prison, but it was a prison you couldn't see because you had forgotten there was anything outside its walls. You began to believe that this constructed identity was who you really were. Your worth became tied to its success. Your security became dependent on its maintenance. Your happiness became contingent on its validation by others who were equally lost in their own false identities. But here's the beautiful truth that the ancient texts knew, what the mystics discovered, what every awakened soul eventually realizes. Underneath all that conditioning, beneath all those layers of forgetting, your true nature remains absolutely untouched and unchanged. The divine essence that you are has never been diminished by a single thought, emotion, or experience. It's been waiting patiently, like the sun behind clouds, for you to remember and return home. The love that you are doesn't increase when you're good and decrease when you're bad. The peace that is your nature doesn't come and go based on your circumstances. The joy that you fundamentally are doesn't depend on getting what you want or avoiding what you don't want. These qualities aren't things you have. They're what you are, and they remain constant and available regardless of what's happening in your thoughts, emotions, or external world. You learn that you had to earn love instead of recognizing that you are love. You learn that you had to find your purpose instead of understanding that your very existence is purposeful. You learn that you had to search for God instead of seeing that the divine has never been separated from you for even a single moment. You learn that peace was something to achieve instead of something to recognize. You learn that happiness was something to pursue instead of something to uncover. This is why the searching feels endless. You're looking for yourself everywhere except the one place you actually exist in this present moment, in this awareness that's listening to these words right now. You're trying to find your home while standing in your living room. You're seeking water while swimming in the ocean. You're searching for light while the sun is shining directly on your face. Let me share another story that illustrates this beautifully, because stories have a way of reaching the heart when concepts cannot penetrate the mind's defenses. There was once a master weaver named Arya who lived in a small village at the foot of a great mountain. She created the most magnificent tapestries anyone had ever seen, works of art so beautiful that people traveled from kingdoms far and wide to commission her creations. What made Arya's work truly extraordinary wasn't just her technical skill, though that was considerable. It was something almost magical about her tapestries. Somehow, she made the dark threads look as beautiful as the light ones. Scenes of great sadness appeared as moving as scenes of great joy. Depictions of loss seemed as sacred as celebrations of abundance. Moments of struggle radiated the same divine beauty as moments of triumph. People couldn't understand how she did it. Other weavers could create technically excellent work, but their pieces clearly favored light over dark, joy over sorrow, success over struggle. In their tapestries, you could see the artist's preferences, their judgments about which experiences were desirable and which were to be avoided. But Arya's work treated every thread, every color, every pattern with equal reverence. Customers would commission tapestries depicting their family histories, and they would be amazed when Arya presented the finished work. The periods of prosperity and the periods of hardship were woven together with such artistry that both seemed necessary, both seemed beautiful, both seemed to contribute to an overall design of breathtaking magnificence. One day, a young apprentice named Maya, who had been studying with Arya for 3 years, finally gathered the courage to ask for the secret. "Master," she said, "I've learned all your techniques. I can match your stitches, blend colors the way you taught me, follow patterns with precision. But my work still looks ordinary compared to yours. How do you make sadness look as beautiful as joy? How do you make loss seem as sacred as gain? How do you make struggle appear as divine as success?" Arya smiled with the gentle kindness of someone who had been waiting for this question, hoping for this teachable moment. "Come with me," she said, leading Maya to her great loom where a magnificent tapestry was in progress. It was a commissioned piece telling the story of a merchant family through 4 generations, prosperity and poverty, love and loss, triumph and tragedy, all woven into an intricate design. From the front of the loom, looking at the side where customers would see the finished work, the tapestry looked chaotic, messy, incomplete. Dark threads seemed to interrupt beautiful patterns with no apparent purpose. Light threads appeared to end abruptly, leaving gaps and inconsistencies. The overall design was impossible to discern. Colors clashed rather than harmonized. It looked like the work of a beginner, random and without skill or vision. Maya was confused and a little disappointed. This couldn't be the work of the master whose finished pieces were so breathtaking. It looked like something she herself might have created in her first week of training. "I don't understand, master. This doesn't look like your usual work." "Look more carefully," Arya said gently. "What do you see in this section here?" She pointed to an area where dark brown and black threads seemed to dominate, creating what looked like a splotch of ugliness in the overall design. "It looks like a mistake," Maya said hesitantly, not wanting to offend her teacher. "Like the dark threads are in the wrong place," interrupting the pattern. "And what do you think this represents in the family story?" Maya consulted the commission notes. "The decade when the family lost their wealth, when the father died young, when the children struggled with poverty and hunger. And how do you feel about that period of their history?" "Sad, I suppose. Tragic. I wish it hadn't happened to them." Arya nodded knowingly. "And that feeling, that judgment about their experience, is what creates ugliness in your work. Now come with me." She led Maya to the back of the loom, and everything changed. From behind, you could see the full design in all its intricate glory. The dark threads that seemed like interruptions from the front were revealed as essential elements of a pattern of extraordinary beauty. Every apparent mistake was perfectly placed. The areas where light threads seemed to end abruptly were actually places where those threads dove underneath to emerge somewhere else, even brighter and more radiant. The section that had looked like ugly splotch from the front was revealed as the deep, rich foundation that made the brighter sections possible. Without those dark threads, the light threads would have had no contrast, no depth, no meaning. The family's period of struggle wasn't a mistake in their story. It was the experience that taught them compassion, resilience, appreciation for simple gifts. It was what made their later joy possible and profound. "This is the secret," Arya said softly. "What looks like chaos from the front reveals itself as perfect order from the back. What seems like mistakes are actually masterful touches. What appears to be random is precisely planned. The difference between my work and other weavers isn't in technique, it's in perspective." Maya stood in stunned silence, seeing for the first time how limited her viewpoint had been. She had been judging individual threads instead of seeing the whole design. She had been favoring certain colors while resenting others, not understanding that beauty requires the full spectrum. "This is your life," Arya continued gently. "You're looking at it from the front, seeing only chaos and interruption, darkness and apparent mistakes. You judge some experiences as good and others as bad, some periods as successful and others as failures. You think some threads don't belong in your tapestry, that some parts of your story are mistakes that shouldn't have happened. But from the divine perspective, from the back of the loom, every experience, every joy, every sorrow, every success, every failure is perfectly placed to create something magnificent. The difficulties you've faced, the challenges you've overcome, the losses you've grieved, these aren't bugs in the system. They're features. They're the very experiences that have woven depth and compassion and wisdom into the fabric of who you are. Maya began to cry as she understood not just the lesson about weaving, but the lesson about living. Every painful experience in her own life, the death of her mother when she was 12, the poverty that had forced her to leave school, the rejection by the boy she thought she loved, the years of struggling to learn this craft suddenly looked different. Not because the pain wasn't real or the struggles weren't difficult, but because she could see how each one had contributed to making her who she was. Her mother's death had taught her that life was precious and temporary, making her appreciate every moment with greater intensity. The poverty had taught her resilience and resourcefulness, qualities that served her in every aspect of life. The romantic rejection had forced her to find her worth within herself, rather than in someone else's approval. The struggles with learning to weave had given her patience and persistence that made her appreciate mastery when it finally came. The divine isn't somewhere else creating your tapestry while you watch helplessly, Arya continued. The divine is the intelligence that you are, weaving your story with perfect precision, using every single thread of experience to create a masterpiece that could not exist without exactly the combination of light and dark that makes up your unique life. This understanding transformed not just Maya's approach to weaving, but her entire relationship with life itself. She stopped resisting difficult experiences and started looking for how they fit into the larger pattern. She stopped judging parts of her story as mistakes and started trusting the intelligence that was creating her life. Her tapestries began to carry the same quality as Arya's work, not because she had learned new techniques, but because she had gained new perspective. Years later, when Maya had become a master weaver herself, students would ask her for the secret of making darkness as beautiful as light. She would smile and take them to look at their work from behind the loom, helping them see that the secret wasn't in the weaving. The secret was in the seeing. You see, the book that was hidden from you isn't really a book at all. It's the living wisdom of your own awakened consciousness. And the reason some people didn't want you to find it isn't because they're evil or controlling. Those systems of control certainly benefit from human forgetfulness. It's because when you remember who you really are, you stop being controllable by fear. You stop needing external validation. You stop believing that your worth depends on your performance or your circumstances. When people remember their divine nature, they become dangerous to anything that profits from human insecurity, inadequacy, or desperation. Not dangerous in a violent way, but dangerous to economic systems that depend on consumer dissatisfaction, political systems that rely on fear and division, social systems that maintain themselves through competition and comparison. A person who knows they are inherently whole doesn't buy products that promise to complete them. A person who recognizes their innate worthiness doesn't accept treatment that diminishes them. A person who remembers their divine nature doesn't need permission from authorities to think their own thoughts, feel their own feelings, or trust their own experience of truth. When you know that you are love itself, you stop looking for love in all the wrong places. When you recognize that you are peace itself, you stop trying to manipulate your circumstances to create peace. When you understand that you are joy itself, you stop making your happiness dependent on getting what you want or avoiding what you don't want. This remembering is revolutionary, but it's the gentlest revolution imaginable. It doesn't require fighting against anything or anyone. It simply requires seeing through the illusions that have kept you searching outside yourself for what was always within. It requires recognizing the light that you are while everyone around you is convinced they're living in darkness. Let me tell you about Marcus, a businessman who discovered this truth in the most unexpected way. Marcus had built an empire that spanned 3 continents and employed thousands of people. Real estate development, technology companies, manufacturing plants, investment funds, he had his hands in everything. From the outside, his life looked like the American dream realized to its fullest extent. Marcus owned penthouses in New York, London, and Tokyo. He had vacation homes in Aspen, the Hamptons, and the French Riviera. His garage housed a collection of exotic cars worth more than most people's houses. He traveled by private jet, vacationed on his own yacht, and had access to exclusive clubs and societies that ordinary people only read about in magazines. His business success had made him a celebrity in entrepreneurial circles. He was featured on magazine covers, invited to speak at prestigious conferences, consulted by world leaders about economic policy. Young entrepreneurs studied his strategies, hoping to replicate his extraordinary success. Business schools taught case studies based on his deals and decisions. But inside, Marcus felt completely empty. He would wake up in his marble bathroom, staring at his reflection in gold-framed mirrors, wondering why success felt so much like failure. The higher he climbed, the more isolated he became. The more he achieved, the more meaningless it all seemed. He had everything he thought he wanted and felt like he had nothing at all. Marcus threw himself into work even harder, thinking that maybe the next deal, the next acquisition, the next milestone would finally bring the satisfaction that had always stayed just out of reach. He hired teams of assistants, consultants, coaches, and therapists. He attended seminars on leadership, workshops on finding purpose, retreats on discovering passion and meaning. Nothing worked. His relationships suffered under the weight of his relentless ambition. His marriage became a business arrangement, more about image management and social positioning than love or connection. His wife lived her own separate life, and they appeared together only at public events where their unity was strategically important. His children saw him as a provider rather than a father. He missed birthdays, school plays, graduations, and soccer games because business always took priority. When he was physically present, he was mentally elsewhere, checking emails on his phone or planning his next move. His kids learned not to expect his attention and stopped trying to get it. His friendships were transactional, based on what people could do for each other rather than genuine affection or shared interests. He was surrounded by people who wanted something from him: access to his network, investment in their projects, endorsement of their ideas, association with his success. He couldn't remember the last time someone had spent time with him simply because they enjoyed his company. Marcus began to realize that his empire, impressive as it appeared from the outside, was built on quicksand. His identity was completely tied to his net worth. His security depended entirely on market forces beyond his control. His happiness was hostage to business outcomes that could change overnight. He was rich in everything except what actually mattered. The stress began to manifest physically. Marcus developed chronic insomnia, waking up at 3 a.m. with his mind racing through problems and opportunities. His back ached constantly from tension. His digestive system rebelled against the combination of stress and irregular eating habits. His doctor warned him about high blood pressure and prescribed medication that made him feel even more disconnected from his body. Then one day, Marcus's carefully constructed world began to collapse. A trusted business partner, someone he had known for 15 years, had been embezzling funds and manipulating financial reports. A series of bad investments, based on fraudulent information provided by this partner, wiped out much of Marcus's liquid capital. The media, which had once celebrated his success, turned on him with vicious enthusiasm, portraying him as either a victim or a co-conspirator. Legal troubles multiplied like cancer. Government investigations began into his business practices. Former partners and employees, sensing vulnerability, filed lawsuits claiming everything from breach of contract to workplace harassment. Banks that had once competed for his business began calling in loans and freezing credit lines. Within 18 months, Marcus had lost everything. His business empire crumbled as assets were seized and sold to pay creditors. His reputation was destroyed by relentless negative coverage and social media attacks. His fair-weather friends disappeared, no longer returning calls or invitations. His wife filed for divorce, taking half of what little remained in full custody of their children. His adult children, embarrassed by the scandal and tired of the chaos, cut off contact completely. Marcus found himself alone in a small studio apartment, the only dwelling he could afford after his assets were liquidated. The apartment was smaller than his former walk-in closet. He owned 3 changes of clothes, a laptop, and a cell phone. He faced criminal charges that would likely send him to prison if he couldn't afford better legal representation than a public defender. One night, sitting on the floor of his empty apartment because even basic furniture had been repossessed, Marcus hit what alcoholics call rock bottom. He had no money, no friends, no family, no business, no reputation, no future that he could envision. The constant noise in his mind, that noise of planning and scheming and worrying and defending and plotting his comeback, suddenly got quiet. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus wasn't trying to become someone or achieve something or fix something or prove something. He wasn't hustling or networking or strategizing or manipulating. He wasn't even hoping, because hope required believing that circumstances could be different, and he had lost all faith in his ability to control circumstances. He was just sitting there, broken and empty, with nowhere to go and nothing left to lose. And in that complete surrender, something extraordinary happened. Marcus discovered something he had never experienced before, something that all his wealth and success had never provided. A sense of peace that didn't depend on anything being different. A feeling of being loved that had nothing to do with being successful or impressive or useful to anyone. For the first time since childhood, Marcus simply existed without agenda. He breathed without purpose. He looked out his window at the city lights without trying to own or control or improve anything. And in that simple presence, he found what he had been searching for his entire adult life through all his achievements and acquisitions. He found himself. The recognition came gradually, like dawn breaking slowly over a landscape. Marcus realized that his worth as a human being had never actually depended on his net worth or his achievements or other people's opinions. Underneath all the doing and having and getting, there was a being that was inherently valuable, inherently whole, inherently connected to something infinitely larger than any business empire. This wasn't a philosophical realization or a psychological insight. It was a direct, immediate recognition of something that had always been true but had been obscured by decades of striving and accumulating and performing. Marcus experienced himself as something more fundamental than any role he had played, any identity he had constructed, any story he had told about his life. The peace he discovered wasn't the absence of problems. He still faced prison, poverty, isolation, and public disgrace. But somehow, these circumstances no longer defined his inner state. He was experiencing what mystics throughout history have called unshakable peace, peace that exists independently of whether life is going according to plan. The love he felt wasn't directed toward anyone or anything in particular. It wasn't even self-love in the usual sense of approving of his choices or circumstances. It was more like recognizing that love is what he was made of, the fundamental substance of his being, regardless of how he had expressed or misexpressed that love through his actions. Marcus spent the next 14 months in minimum security prison, and later described that time as the most spiritually rich period of his life. Without the distractions of business, without the constant stimulation of deal-making and wealth accumulation, without the endless options that money provides, he was forced to discover resources he never knew he possessed. He began each day with meditation, not because he was trying to achieve any particular state, but because sitting quietly had become his favorite activity. He found profound satisfaction in simple tasks like mopping floors, serving food in the cafeteria, organizing the prison library. He discovered that presence and attention could transform any activity into something meaningful. His relationships with other inmates were the most authentic connections he had experienced in decades. Without money or status to complicate interactions, people related to him simply as Marcus, another human being dealing with the consequences of his choices. He learned to listen without trying to fix or advise or impress. He offered friendship without expecting anything in return. Marcus began writing letters to his children, not asking for forgiveness or trying to explain his actions, but simply expressing his love for them and his gratitude for the privilege of being their father. He didn't expect responses, and didn't receive many, but the act of writing became a form of prayer, a way of sending love without attachment to how it was received. When Marcus was released from prison, everyone expected him to be broken, defeated, planning his comeback with renewed desperation. Instead, he seemed to glow with an inner light that was more attractive than any of his former wealth had ever been. People were drawn to him in a completely different way than before. He started a simple nonprofit helping other executives who had lost everything find their way back to hope and meaning. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy, no grand business plan or ambitious expansion strategy. Just one human being who had remembered his essential nature helping others remember theirs. The work was deeply fulfilling in a way that building his empire had never been. Marcus discovered that when you know who you really are, success and failure become equally interesting experiences rather than definitions of your worth. He approached his nonprofit work with the same intensity and intelligence he had brought to business, but without the desperate need for outcomes that had characterized his corporate career. The organization grew organically, not through aggressive marketing or strategic planning, but through the simple power of authentic transformation. Men and women who had lost everything in various ways found hope and direction through Marcus's guidance. Many went on to rebuild successful careers, but more importantly, they rebuilt their lives on a foundation of inner security rather than external achievement. Marcus remarried 5 years after his release, this time to a woman who loved him for who he was rather than what he could provide. Sarah was a social worker who earned a modest salary but was rich in wisdom and compassion. Their relationship was based on genuine connection, shared values, and mutual respect rather than convenience or image management. His adult children, seeing this authentic transformation in the peace that radiated from their father, gradually rebuilt their relationship with him. It took time and required honest conversations about the pain his choices had caused, but eventually they recognized that the man who had been absent during their childhoods had somehow become present in a way he never had been before. Marcus often said that losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to him, because it forced him to discover what could never be lost. His identity wasn't his achievements. His worth wasn't his wealth. His security wasn't his circumstances. His true treasure was the consciousness that he was, the awareness that remained peaceful and loving regardless of what was happening in his external world. But Marcus's story illustrates more than just personal transformation. It reveals a fundamental truth about the nature of abundance itself. When you're trying to extract abundance from the world through manipulation, strategy, and accumulation, you're always worried about scarcity. There's never enough money, never enough success, never enough security. You live in constant fear of loss because your well-being depends on maintaining and increasing your external possessions. When you recognize that abundance is your nature, that you are inherently whole and complete, you stop trying to get abundance and start expressing it. Instead of hoarding resources, you share them freely. Instead of competing with others, you collaborate and support. Instead of fearing loss, you trust in the infinite creativity of life itself. This shift from seeking abundance to expressing abundance transforms not just your relationship with money and success, but your entire approach to living. You stop asking what you can get from each situation and start asking what you can give. You stop trying to manipulate outcomes and start trusting the intelligence that orchestrates all outcomes. Marcus's nonprofit succeeded not because he had a better business plan than other organizations, but because it was an expression of genuine love rather than a strategy for personal gain. When you create from love rather than fear, from service rather than self-interest, from trust rather than control, you tap into a power that individual effort could never access. Now, I can almost hear what you're thinking. This sounds beautiful, but how do I actually experience this? How do I stop just believing these ideas and start living this truth? How do I access this peace and love when I'm dealing with real problems, real stress, real challenges in my daily life? This is where the ancient practices come in, but not the way most people teach them. Most spiritual practices are taught as ways to get somewhere else, to achieve some future state of enlightenment or awakening. They become another form of seeking, another way to postpone your happiness until you've mastered some technique or reached some spiritual milestone. But the real practices, the ones that actually work, are invitations to recognize what's already present. They're not about becoming divine. They're about remembering that you've never been anything else. They're not about creating peace and love. They're about uncovering the peace and love that are already here, that have always been here, that are the very foundation of your being. Let me teach you the most powerful practice I know, and it's so simple you might dismiss it, but please don't. This practice has transformed more lives than any complex technique or expensive course or elaborate spiritual system. It's called the sacred pause, and it will change your entire relationship with life if you use it consistently. Here's how it works, and I want you to try this right now as I'm describing it. Several times throughout your day, just stop. Not because anything is wrong, not because you need to fix or change anything, but simply to remember who you are. Take one conscious breath. Not a special breath, not a deep breath, not a breathing technique. Just one breath where you're actually present for the breathing. Notice how your body naturally knows how to breathe without any effort or control on your part. Feel the air entering your nostrils, filling your lungs, then naturally releasing. In that moment of simple presence, ask yourself this question: what is aware of this breath? Don't try to answer with your mind. Don't make it complicated or turn it into a philosophical inquiry. Just rest in the awareness that's naturally present. The awareness that's listening to these words right now. The awareness that's been with you since you were born. The awareness that remains completely peaceful, even when your thoughts are chaotic, even when your emotions are intense, even when your circumstances are challenging. That awareness is not something you have, like a possession or a quality. That awareness is what you are at the most fundamental level. It's not separate from the divine consciousness that creates and sustains all life. It's not a piece of God or a spark of the divine. It's the very same awareness looking through your eyes that looks through every pair of eyes that has ever existed. Try this now. Stop reading for a moment and just be aware of being aware. Notice that you don't have to create this awareness or achieve it or earn it. It's simply here, effortlessly present, peacefully observing whatever is happening in your experience right now. This awareness doesn't judge your thoughts as good or bad. It doesn't resist your emotions or try to change them. It doesn't worry about your problems or get excited about your successes. It simply is, perfectly present, unconditionally accepting, naturally loving. This might sound too simple to be profound, but simplicity is the hallmark of truth. Complexity is how we hide from what's obvious. The divine doesn't need to be complicated because love itself is the most natural thing in the universe. A flower doesn't struggle to be beautiful. A river doesn't work hard to flow. The sun doesn't effort to shine. They simply express their nature, and their nature is inherently divine. Your true nature is just as natural, just as effortless, just as divine. When you're aligned with this nature, life stops feeling like a struggle and starts feeling like a dance. Challenges still arise, but you meet them from a place of inner stability rather than fear and reactivity. Emotions still move through you, but you experience them as weather patterns in the sky of consciousness rather than threats to your well-being. Let me tell you about Sarah, a mother who discovered this truth while changing her baby's diaper at 3 in the morning. Sarah was a new mom, completely overwhelmed by the demands of caring for an infant. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in weeks. Her body ached from nursing and carrying and constant vigilance. Her hormones were chaotic, her emotions unpredictable, and she was beginning to question every decision she had made about becoming a parent. The baby books had made motherhood sound like an instinctual joy, but Sarah's experience was mostly exhaustion, punctuated by moments of panic. She loved her son desperately, but she felt completely inadequate to meet his needs. Every cry sent her into a spiral of worry and self-doubt. Was he hungry, uncomfortable, sick? Was she doing something wrong? Other mothers made this look so easy. That particular night, 6-month-old David had been crying for hours. Nothing seemed to help. Feeding, rocking, singing, walking around the house, changing positions, checking his temperature, every strategy she tried failed to comfort him. Sarah was reaching the end of her rope, feeling like a complete failure as a mother. As she cleaned his diaper for the 4th time that night, in the dim light of the nursery, she felt a familiar wave of frustration and self-pity starting to rise. She began the internal dialogue that had become her constant companion during these difficult months. What was wrong with her that she couldn't soothe her own baby? Other mothers seemed to have some natural wisdom that she lacked. Maybe she wasn't cut out for motherhood. Maybe David could sense her incompetence, and that's why he wouldn't stop crying. The spiral of self-judgment was gaining momentum when something made her pause. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was grace, but she looked into her baby's eyes, and for just a moment, time stopped. In those innocent, trusting eyes, she saw something that took her breath away. Pure being, unconditional presence, love without agenda or expectation or demand. And in that moment of recognition, she realized that what she was seeing in her baby's eyes was the same divine essence that was looking out through her own. Her son wasn't crying because she was a bad mother. He was crying because that's what babies do when they're uncomfortable or overstimulated, or simply processing the overwhelming experience of being human. His discomfort wasn't a judgment of her worthiness. It was simply an experience arising in the moment. More importantly, Sarah recognized that beneath her frustration, beneath her exhaustion, beneath her self-doubt, there was a love so vast and unconditional that it could hold all of these difficult experiences without being diminished by them. The love she felt for her son wasn't something she had to generate or maintain through effort. It was flowing through her from a source that never ran dry, never depleted, never questioned its own adequacy. In that sacred moment, changing a diaper became as holy as any religious ceremony. Caring for her child became a form of worship, not because she was serving God in some distant heaven, but because she was recognizing that the love flowing through her was God expressing itself as a mother's care. The crying didn't magically stop. David continued to fuss for another hour before finally falling asleep. But Sarah's experience of the crying was completely transformed. Instead of evidence of her failure, it became an opportunity to practice presence. Instead of a problem to solve, It became a chance to offer love without expecting anything in return. From that night forward, Sarah's entire relationship with motherhood changed. The sleepless nights became opportunities for presence rather than endurance tests. She learned to find moments of meditation while nursing, resting in the simple miracle of nourishing another being with her own body. The tantrums and fussiness became invitations to practice patience rather than evidence of her inadequacy. The mundane moments of motherhood, feeding, bathing, playing, cleaning, became doorways to the sacred rather than tasks to get through. Sarah began to see that she didn't need to be a perfect mother. She just needed to be a present mother, bringing her full attention and authentic care to whatever was needed in each moment. She discovered that she didn't need to go to church to find God. God was already there in every act of love she offered. She didn't need to meditate for hours in silence to experience the divine. The divine was expressing itself through her willingness to get up at 3 a.m. to comfort her child. She didn't need to read spiritual books to understand unconditional love. She was living it every day through her commitment to caring for this little being regardless of how challenging it became. This transformation extended beyond her relationship with David to every aspect of her life. Sarah began bringing this same quality of presence to her marriage, her friendships, her work. She stopped rushing through experiences trying to get to some imagined better moment and started recognizing the perfection that was available right where she was. When David was old enough for playgroups, other mothers noticed something different about Sarah. She seemed calm in situations that stressed other parents. She wasn't constantly worried about whether David was developing normally or hitting milestones on schedule. She trusted his unique timing and celebrated his individual personality rather than comparing him to other children. Sarah's peace wasn't based on having an easy baby or perfect circumstances. David continued to be a sensitive child who required extra patience and understanding. But Sarah had learned to meet his needs from a place of inner fullness rather than depletion. She had discovered the inexhaustible source of love and wisdom within her own being. This is what I mean by ordinary enlightenment. You don't need to sit on a mountaintop or join a monastery. You don't need to have mystical visions or supernatural experiences. You don't need to become someone different or achieve some special state of consciousness. You just need to recognize the divine presence that's already expressing itself through your ordinary life, through your daily choices to love and serve and care. The sacred isn't separate from the mundane. The mundane is where the sacred expresses itself most beautifully. God isn't hiding in churches and temples. God is playing hide and seek in every interaction, every moment of kindness, every choice to respond with love instead of fear. But let's be honest about something, because I want to give you the whole truth, not just the inspiring parts. This path isn't always easy, and anyone who tells you it is hasn't walked it very far. There will be times when you forget who you are. Times when the old patterns of fear and seeking take over completely. Times when you feel just as lost and confused as ever, maybe even more so because now you know there's another way to live, but you can't seem to access it. This isn't failure. This is part of the journey. Forgetting is how you remember more deeply. Falling asleep is how you learn to stay awake more consciously. Getting lost is how you discover that you can never actually be lost, because you are always exactly where you are. Let me share the story of David, a man whose journey through profound loss taught him about the indestructible nature of what we really are. David was a successful architect who had spent 20 years building what he thought was a perfect life. He had married his college sweetheart, raised 2 children in a beautiful home he had designed himself, built a thriving practice creating sustainable buildings that were both functional and artistic. David's life seemed charmed from the outside. His marriage to Lisa was the envy of their friends, built on genuine partnership and shared values. Their children, Emma and Jake, were thriving in school and extracurricular activities. His architectural firm had won numerous awards and was featured regularly in design magazines. He felt like he had successfully created the life he had always dreamed of. Then, in the space of 18 months, everything fell apart. It started with Lisa's diagnosis of early-onset Alzheimer's disease at age 48. The woman who had been his intellectual equal, his creative collaborator, his best friend, began to fade away one memory at a time. The doctors said she might have 5 to 10 years, but those years would be a gradual journey into confusion and loss. While David was struggling to accept this devastating news and adjust to becoming Lisa's caregiver, their teenage son Jake was killed in a car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit Jake's car as he was driving home from basketball practice. David got the call while sitting in a hospital waiting room during one of Lisa's appointments. The police officer's words seemed to come from another dimension, impossible to process or accept. 6 months later, while David was still reeling from Jake's death and Lisa's deteriorating condition, the economy crashed and his architectural firm went bankrupt. Years of careful financial planning evaporated overnight. The beautiful home he had designed, which held so many memories of their happy family life, had to be sold to pay debts and medical expenses. David found himself caring for a wife who no longer recognized him, grieving a son who would never come home, and facing financial ruin after losing his life's work. Friends didn't know what to say to someone experiencing such overwhelming loss. Many stopped calling altogether, unable to face the reminder of how quickly life could unravel. The man who had spent his career creating stable, beautiful structures watched his entire world collapse like a house of cards. David had always prided himself on being able to solve problems, to design solutions, to build something better from whatever materials were available. But this combination of challenges seemed to have no solution, no way forward, no possible design for reconstruction. He tried everything he could think of to manage the overwhelming grief and stress. Therapy helped him process some of the emotions, but couldn't change the fundamental reality of his losses. Medication took the edge off his anxiety, but left him feeling disconnected from everything, including his memories of happier times. Support groups for caregivers and bereaved parents provided some comfort, but the pain remained as intense as ever. David began to believe that his life was essentially over, that everything meaningful had been taken away and would never be restored. He went through the motions of daily existence caring for Lisa, managing medical appointments and insurance paperwork, maintaining basic household functions, but felt like he was sleepwalking through someone else's nightmare. One gray November morning, almost 2 years after Jake's death, David was sitting by the lake where his family used to have picnics when the children were young. He had brought Lisa there hoping the familiar setting might spark some recognition, but she stared blankly at the water with no sign of remembering the countless happy hours they had spent on this shore. As David sat watching his wife gaze at nothing, feeling more alone than he had ever thought possible, something unexpected happened. The constant noise in his mind, the endless rehearsal of loss, the desperate searching for ways to fix the unfixable, the angry questioning of why this was happening to them suddenly got quiet. In that silence, David became aware of something he hadn't noticed in months of grief and struggle. There was a stillness within him that was completely undisturbed by any of the chaos in his external circumstances. Beneath the pain, beneath the fear, beneath the overwhelming sense of loss, there was something that remained intact and peaceful. It wasn't that the pain disappeared or that he suddenly felt better about his situation. The grief was still there. The fear about the future was still real. The sense of loss was still devastating. But David recognized that he was more than his pain, bigger than his circumstances, deeper than any experience that could happen to him. For the first time since the disasters began, David experienced a few moments of genuine peace. Not because anything had changed in his external world, but because he had touched something within himself that could never be taken away, never be lost, never be damaged by any circumstances, however devastating. The awareness that was aware of his grief was not grieving. The consciousness that observed his fear was not afraid. The love that he fundamentally was had not been diminished by any loss, no matter how precious what was lost had been to him. This wasn't a permanent transformation or a magical healing of his pain. David continued to struggle with grief, continued to face the daily challenges of caring for Lisa as her condition worsened, continued to rebuild his financial life from nothing. But he had touched something real, something unshakable, something that gave him strength to continue even when everything seemed hopeless. Over the months that followed, David learned to return to this place of inner stillness whenever the overwhelm became too much to bear. He discovered that he could grieve deeply while still remaining connected to the peace that was always available beneath the surface of his emotions. He could feel afraid about the future while trusting the fundamental okayness that was his true nature. David began volunteering at a hospice, helping other families navigate the impossible terrain of loss and letting go. He found that his own experience of devastating grief, rather than making him bitter or closed off, had somehow opened his heart to a deeper level of compassion and understanding. When Lisa died 4 years later, David was able to be present for her passing in a way that honored both his love for her and his acceptance of life's natural cycles. The grief was profound, but it was clean grief, unmarked by resistance or the demand that reality be different than it was. David never remarried, but he built a rich life of service, creativity, and connection. He started a small nonprofit that provided architectural services for low-income families, designing beautiful, affordable homes for people who had never imagined they could live in something both functional and inspiring. He often said that losing everything he thought he needed had taught him what he actually was. His identity wasn't his role as husband and father. His worth wasn't his professional success. His security wasn't his circumstances. What he actually was could never be lost because it wasn't something he possessed. It was what he was made of, the very substance of his being. David's story illustrates one of the most challenging but liberating truths in that hidden book. What we think we are, the roles we play, the relationships we cherish, the achievements we accumulate, the identities we construct can be lost. But what we actually are, the consciousness that plays all roles, the love that creates all relationships, the awareness that witnesses all achievements, the peace that remains when all identities dissolve can never be diminished or destroyed. This doesn't mean you should detach from life or stop caring about people and goals and experiences. It means you can engage fully with everything you love, while knowing that your deepest happiness and security don't depend on keeping everything exactly as you want it to be. You can love completely while holding lightly. You can care deeply while trusting ultimately. When you know what you really are, loss becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. Grief becomes a way of honoring love rather than evidence that love has failed. Change becomes an opportunity for growth rather than a threat to your stability. Even death becomes a doorway rather than a wall, because you recognize that what you essentially are has never been born and can never die. This brings us to one of the most practical and immediate applications of this understanding. How do you actually live from this recognition? How do you integrate this remembering into your daily life with all its mundane concerns about work and money and relationships and responsibilities? The key is understanding that spiritual practice isn't something you do at special times in special places. Spiritual practice is bringing the awareness of your true nature to everything you do, everywhere you go, in every moment you remember to do so. Every morning when you wake up, before you check your phone or start thinking about your day, or get caught up in the familiar momentum of doing and achieving and managing, take just 30 seconds to remember who you are. Not your name or your role or your problems or your goals, but your essential nature. You are the awareness in which all experiences appear and disappear. You are the space in which all thoughts and emotions arise and pass away. You are the love that exists before and beyond all conditions. This isn't positive thinking or affirmations or trying to convince yourself of something that isn't true. This is recognition of what's already here, acknowledgement of what's already real, remembering of what you've temporarily forgotten. Set an intention for your day, but not the kind most people set. Don't set an intention to accomplish specific things or avoid specific outcomes, or control how other people behave or manipulate circumstances to match your preferences. Set the intention to remember love in every interaction, to bring presence to every moment, to see the divine in every person you encounter, including yourself, especially yourself. Throughout the day, practice what I call loving awareness. This means bringing the same gentle, accepting attention to whatever you're experiencing that a loving grandmother brings to watching her grandchildren play. Your emotions aren't problems to solve or enemies to fight. They're experiences to welcome with curiosity. Your thoughts aren't threats to defend against or noise to eliminate. They're movements in consciousness to observe with compassion. When you find yourself getting caught in old patterns of worry or anger or sadness or fear, don't try to change or fix the feeling. Don't judge yourself for having the experience. Don't add suffering to suffering by making your emotions into evidence that you're doing something wrong or failing spiritually. Just notice that you're aware of whatever you're experiencing. The awareness that knows you're worried is not worried. The awareness that observes your anger is not angry. The awareness that witnesses your sadness is not sad. The awareness that sees your fear is not afraid. Rest in that aware space, even while the emotion continues to move through you. That's your true home. This practice of loving awareness extends to every relationship in your life, and this is where the teaching becomes truly transformative. Instead of seeing other people as separate beings who either help or hinder your happiness, start seeing them as different expressions of the same consciousness you are. That difficult coworker who pushes all your buttons? That's consciousness playing the role of teacher, showing you where you still believe in separation, where you still think your peace depends on other people behaving the way you want them to. That loving friend who supports and encourages you? That's consciousness celebrating its own nature through the gift of connection and mutual recognition. Your family members, especially the challenging ones, are perfect mirrors showing you exactly what you need to see about your own attachments and resistances. When your partner does something that triggers you, instead of focusing on changing them or proving that you're right, ask yourself what this trigger is teaching you about your own need to control or be validated or be seen in a certain way. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or accepting harmful behavior. It means responding from love instead of reacting from fear. It means setting boundaries from a place of self-respect rather than victimhood. It means saying no when no serves love and saying yes when yes serves love. Let me tell you about Jennifer, a woman who transformed her marriage by applying this principle. Jennifer and her husband Michael had been fighting for years about everything: money, time, priorities, parenting decisions, household responsibilities. Every conversation became a battle about who was right and who was wrong. They had tried marriage counseling, communication workshops, even a trial separation, but nothing seemed to help. Jennifer was ready to file for divorce. Their fights followed the same exhausting pattern every time. Michael would come home stressed from his job as a project manager at a construction company and make some comment about the house being messy or dinner not being ready. Jennifer would feel criticized and unappreciated, and she would defend herself by pointing out everything she had accomplished that day while working part-time and caring for their 4-year-old daughter. Michael would feel attacked and respond by listing all the ways he contributed to the household through his 60-hour work weeks and weekend home improvement projects. Jennifer would counter with examples of how he didn't help enough with childcare and emotional labor. Round and round they would go, each trying to prove their worth and justify their position, until one of them stormed out or they collapsed into cold silence. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. Michael had been traveling for work and came home to find dishes in the sink, toys scattered across the living room, and no dinner prepared. Jennifer had spent the day dealing with their sick 4-year-old while also trying to meet a deadline for her freelance graphic design work. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and hanging on by a thread. When Michael walked in and said, "Wow, what happened here? It looks like a tornado hit the place," something inside Jennifer snapped. The fight that followed was their worst ever. Voices were raised, cruel things were said about each other's character and commitment, and both of them declared they were done trying to make the marriage work. That night, lying in bed with Michael sleeping in the guest room and their daughter asking why mommy and daddy were being so loud, Jennifer found herself staring at the ceiling and asking a different question than she had ever asked before. Instead of asking how she could make Michael understand her point of view or change his behavior, she asked herself what this conflict was teaching her about her own fears and attachments. She realized that her anger wasn't really about the messy house comment. It was about her deep fear that she wasn't good enough, that no matter how hard she tried, she would never be the perfect wife and mother she thought she should be. Michael's criticism triggered this fear, and instead of acknowledging her own insecurity, she had been trying to manage it by controlling his words and reactions. For the first time, Jennifer saw that she had been relating to Michael as an opponent in a battle for validation, rather than as a fellow human being struggling with his own fears and trying to find his own way back to love. His stress about the house wasn't really about cleanliness. It was his way of trying to feel some sense of control in a life that often felt overwhelming and chaotic. She recognized that Michael's critical comments usually came when he was feeling most insecure about his own performance as a provider and protector. His long work hours weren't just about making money, they were about proving his worth as a man and a father. When he came home to chaos, it triggered his fear that all his sacrifice and effort weren't enough to create the stable, happy family he desperately wanted to provide. The next morning, instead of continuing the fight or giving him the silent treatment as she usually did, Jennifer tried something completely different. When Michael came into the kitchen for coffee, clearly prepared for round 2 of their argument, she looked at him with fresh eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "not for the house being messy, but for making you the enemy when you're really my partner. I know you weren't trying to hurt me last night. You were just tired and stressed, and I responded to my own hurt feelings instead of hearing what you were actually saying." Michael was so surprised that he almost dropped his coffee mug. He had been preparing his own defenses, his own counterattacks, and Jennifer's response completely disarmed him. For the first time in years, instead of defending his position, he found himself actually listening to his wife. "I wasn't trying to criticize you," he said softly. "I know how hard you work, especially when I'm traveling. I think I was just feeling guilty about being gone and taking it out on you instead of dealing with my own stuff." That conversation became the turning point in their marriage, not because they suddenly agreed on everything or never had conflicts again, but because they had learned to see each other as allies instead of enemies. Jennifer began responding to Michael's stress and complaints not as personal attacks, but as expressions of his own fear and pain. Michael started recognizing that Jennifer's defensive reactions weren't character flaws, but protective responses born from her own insecurities and exhaustion. Their conversations became gentler. Their conflicts became opportunities for deeper understanding instead of battles for dominance. Their relationship became a spiritual practice, a way of offering love even when love wasn't being offered back, a laboratory for learning how to see past surface behaviors to the deeper needs and fears underneath. This transformation didn't happen overnight. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves, times when they both forgot their new understanding and fell back into familiar fights. But each time they remembered, each time they chose love over being right, their connection deepened. Jennifer discovered that the key wasn't trying to change Michael or control his reactions. The key was remembering that her peace and happiness didn't depend on his mood or behavior. When she stayed connected to her own inner stability, she could respond to his stress with compassion instead of reactivity. Michael learned that Jennifer's emotions weren't threats to defend against, but invitations to practice presence and understanding. When she was upset, instead of trying to fix her feelings or prove they were unreasonable, he could simply listen and offer comfort. 5 years later, Jennifer and Michael described their marriage as better than it had ever been, even during their honeymoon phase. Not because they don't have challenges or disagreements, but because they've learned to navigate those challenges from love instead of fear, from curiosity instead of defensiveness, from a desire to understand rather than a need to be understood. Their daughter, now 9 years old, grew up witnessing this transformation. Instead of learning that conflict means attacking and defending, she learned that disagreement can be an opportunity for deeper connection. Instead of seeing her parents as adversaries who barely tolerate each other, she sees them as best friends who sometimes have different opinions but always work things out with kindness and respect. This is the real secret that was hidden in that ancient book. Love isn't something you fall into or out of based on how other people behave. Love is what you are. And when you remember this, every relationship becomes a chance to practice expressing your true nature, regardless of whether that love is returned in the way you expect or prefer. But what about money and success and all the practical concerns of life? Does remembering your divine nature mean you have to give up your ambitions or live in poverty? Does spiritual awakening require you to become passive or uninterested in material success? Absolutely not. In fact, when you stop seeking fulfillment through external achievements and start expressing your true nature through your work, you often become more successful than you ever imagined possible. But the success feels completely different. Instead of achieving things to prove your worth or to fill an inner emptiness, you create and contribute because that's what love does. Love expresses itself. Love serves. Love creates beauty and solves problems and makes things better. When you're aligned with your true nature, abundance becomes natural. Not because you're trying to attract it or manifest it through positive thinking or visualization techniques, but because you're no longer blocking it with beliefs about scarcity or unworthiness. You realize that the same intelligence that grows your hair and heals your cuts and beats your heart without any conscious effort on your part is perfectly capable of providing for your material needs. This doesn't mean money will fall from the sky, or that you don't need to take practical action or develop skills or work hard. It means you take action from love instead of fear, from inspiration instead of desperation, from trust instead of anxiety. And somehow, in ways that your fearful mind could never have planned or predicted, things work out. Let me tell you about Maria, a talented artist who discovered this truth while facing the biggest challenge of her career. Maria had been a successful commercial photographer for 15 years, building a reputation for creating striking images for advertising campaigns and corporate clients. Her work was technically excellent and commercially viable, but she felt increasingly empty and disconnected from her creativity. Every project became an exercise in giving clients what they wanted, rather than expressing what she felt called to create. She was making good money, 6 figures annually from her commercial work, but she was dying inside. Her camera, which had once been a tool for capturing beauty and meaning, had become an instrument for manufacturing images that sold products and promoted brands she didn't believe in. Maria dreamed of transitioning to fine art photography, of creating work that mattered to her soul rather than just her bank account. But the financial reality seemed impossible. She had a mortgage on a beautiful studio space, car payments, health insurance costs, and aging parents who sometimes needed financial support. Her commercial work paid well, but it required constant hustle, constant networking, constant compromise of her artistic vision. For years, she told herself that someday she would make the transition, when she had enough savings, when the market was better, when she had more connections in the art world, when her parents were more financially stable, when the timing was right. But someday never seemed to come, and Maria found herself growing more bitter and resentful with each passing year. She began to hate the work that paid her bills. Every corporate headshot felt like selling her soul. Every product campaign made her feel complicit in promoting materialism and superficiality. Every dollar she earned felt like payment for betraying her authentic calling. But she couldn't see any way out of the trap she had created. The breaking point came when she was hired to photograph a campaign for a fast fashion company known for exploiting workers in developing countries and contributing to environmental destruction. The pay was excellent, $30,000 for a week's work, but every shot felt like a betrayal of her values. Standing in the studio, directing models to pose with clothes made through human suffering and environmental degradation, Maria realized she couldn't continue living this way. She was making money by promoting everything she opposed. She was successful by every external measure, but completely lost to herself. That night, she made a decision that terrified her. She would finish her existing commercial contracts and then transition to creating the art she actually wanted to make, regardless of whether it was financially viable. She had no plan, no guarantee of success, no safety net. She just knew she couldn't continue selling her soul for security. The first year was incredibly challenging. Maria's income dropped by 70% as she turned down commercial work to focus on her art. She had to make significant lifestyle changes, moving to a smaller studio space, selling her expensive camera equipment and replacing it with simpler tools, eating out less frequently, canceling subscriptions and memberships she had taken for granted. There were moments of panic, times when she questioned her decision and considered going back to commercial work. Her savings dwindled faster than anticipated. Friends thought she was having a midlife crisis. Her parents worried about her financial stability. Even Maria sometimes wondered if she was being naive and impractical. But something magical began to happen as Maria started creating from authenticity instead of obligation. Her art became more powerful, more distinctive, more emotionally resonant than anything she had produced during her commercial career. She was photographing subjects that mattered to her: social justice issues, environmental destruction, the beauty of aging, the dignity of people society often ignored. The work was deeply fulfilling in a way that her commercial photography had never been. Even when she was struggling financially, even when she didn't know how she would pay next month's rent, Maria felt more alive and purposeful than she had in years. She was finally expressing her true nature through her creativity instead of suppressing it for money. Word about her new work began to spread organically, not through the aggressive networking and self-promotion that had characterized her commercial career, but through the natural attraction that authentic work creates. A small gallery agreed to show her environmental series after seeing just 3 images. A nonprofit hired her to document their work with homeless veterans. A magazine commissioned a photo essay about immigrant families. Each opportunity led to others, but not in the linear, strategic way that Maria had always approached career advancement. Instead, it felt like life itself was conspiring to support her authentic expression. People who could help her work reach wider audiences seemed to appear exactly when she needed them. Funding opportunities opened up just as her savings ran low. Recognition came not because she was seeking it, but because her work was making a genuine impact. 3 years after making the transition, Maria was earning almost as much from her fine art and socially conscious photography as she had from commercial work. But more importantly, she was earning it by expressing her values and vision rather than compromising them. Her work was being exhibited in galleries, published in respected magazines, and making a real difference in raising awareness about issues she cared about. Maria often said that the leap from commercial to artistic work taught her the difference between trying to extract abundance from the world and allowing abundance to flow through her. When she was chasing commercial success, she was always worried about competition, always hustling for the next client, always trying to position herself strategically in the market. When she started creating from authenticity, the work itself became magnetic, drawing opportunities and collaborators and support in ways she could never have engineered through effort alone. She discovered that when you align with your true purpose, the universe seems to organize itself around supporting that purpose. This doesn't mean the path was easy, or that everything worked out perfectly. Maria still had to handle the practical aspects of running a business, marketing her work, managing finances, and navigating the challenges of being a freelance artist. But she approached these tasks from a place of trust and service rather than fear and manipulation. Instead of trying to create artificial scarcity or manipulate clients into higher fees, she charged fairly for work that genuinely served her clients' needs. Instead of competing with other photographers, she collaborated and referred work to colleagues whose skills better matched particular projects. Instead of hoarding opportunities, she shared resources and connections generously. This approach to business, based on trust and service rather than fear and competition, proved to be both more profitable and more sustainable than her previous methods. Clients became collaborators who were excited to support her artistic vision. Other photographers became allies rather than competitors. The art world, which she had imagined as cutthroat and exclusive, revealed itself to be full of people who were eager to support authentic work that made a positive difference. Maria's story illustrates what happens when you stop trying to get something from the world and start giving your authentic gifts to the world. Success becomes a natural byproduct of expressing your true nature rather than a goal you have to chase and fight for. Money flows more easily because you're creating real value rather than trying to manufacture demand for something the world doesn't actually need. This is what I mean by aligned abundance. When you know who you really are, your work becomes a form of worship, a way of offering your unique expression of love to the world. Whether you're teaching children or building software or caring for elderly patients or running a business, you can transform any job into a spiritual practice by bringing your full presence and authentic care to whatever you're doing. The key is remembering that your value doesn't come from your productivity or your achievements or other people's approval. Your value comes from your being, and your being is inherently divine. When you know this deeply, you can engage fully with work and goals and ambitions without needing them to provide you with identity or worth or security. This brings us to one of the most challenging aspects of this path, the question that every seeker eventually faces. What happens when life breaks your heart? What happens when you lose someone you love, when your health fails, when your dreams die, when the world seems filled with suffering and injustice? How do you maintain faith in love and divinity when faced with experiences that seem to contradict everything beautiful and meaningful? This is where the deepest wisdom in that hidden book reveals itself. Suffering isn't the opposite of spiritual awakening. Suffering is often the doorway to spiritual awakening. Not because suffering is good or necessary or part of some divine plan, but because suffering has a way of stripping away everything that isn't essential, everything that isn't real, until only truth remains. When everything you thought you could count on is taken away, when all your strategies for finding happiness fail, when all your beliefs about how life should work are shattered, you're forced to discover what remains. And what remains always is the indestructible essence of what you are. The love that you are cannot be lost. The awareness that you are cannot be damaged. The peace that is your true nature cannot be destroyed by any circumstance. Let me share a story that illustrates this beautifully, because this story has helped countless people find meaning in their darkest hours. There was once a master potter named Elena who had devoted her entire life to creating the most exquisite ceramics anyone had ever seen. Her pieces were displayed in galleries around the world, coveted by collectors, praised by critics. She found her identity, her purpose, her sense of worth in her ability to transform ordinary clay into objects of extraordinary beauty. Elena's studio was her sanctuary, a converted warehouse filled with decades of work that represented not just artistic achievement but the story of her life. Each piece held memories, emotions, breakthrough moments in her creative development. She could walk through her studio and see her entire journey as an artist reflected in the evolution of her work, from her early experimental pieces to her mature masterworks. The studio was organized with meticulous care. Finished pieces were displayed on custom-built shelves, organized by series and chronology. Work in progress occupied several large tables. Her collection of glazes filled an entire wall, hundreds of colors she had mixed herself over the years. Her kilns, some of which she had built with her own hands, stood ready to transform clay into ceramic magic. Elena had been working for 18 months on what she considered her masterpiece, a series of 12 large vessels that seemed to capture light itself in their glazed surfaces. These pieces represented everything she had learned about her craft over 4 decades, every technique she had mastered, every insight she had gained about the alchemy of earth and fire and human creativity. The vessels were unlike anything she had created before. Each one stood nearly 3 feet tall, with walls so thin they seemed to glow from within. The glazes she had developed for this series created surfaces that changed color depending on the angle of view and the quality of light. They seemed to breathe, to pulse with life, to contain some essence that transcended their physical form. Gallery owners from major cities had already expressed interest in the series. A prominent museum was considering acquiring the entire collection for a special exhibition. Art critics who had seen preliminary photos were calling it the most significant ceramic work of the decade. Elena felt like her life's work was finally receiving the recognition it deserved. One December night, a fire swept through the arts district where Elena's studio was located. An electrical problem in a neighboring building ignited a blaze that spread quickly through the old wooden structures that housed dozens of artists' workspaces. By the time the fire department arrived, decades of work had been reduced to ash and melted glass. Standing in the ruins the next morning, Elena felt as if her very identity had been destroyed along with her pottery. The masterpiece series was gone. 40 years of artistic development was erased. Her tools, her kilns, her carefully collected materials, her reference books and photographs, everything that had defined her as an artist was reduced to charred debris. For months, Elena couldn't bring herself to touch clay again. Every time she tried, she was overcome by grief for what was lost and terror that she would never create anything beautiful again. She began to believe that without her art, she was nothing. Her hands, which had once shaped clay with confident grace, trembled with uncertainty. Her mind, which had once overflowed with creative visions, felt empty and barren. Friends and family encouraged her to rebuild, to start over, to see this as an opportunity for a fresh beginning. But Elena couldn't see past her loss. She felt like a musician who had lost her hearing, a writer who had forgotten how to read. The fire hadn't just destroyed her work, it had destroyed her sense of who she was. Insurance money eventually came through, enough to rent a new studio space and buy basic equipment, but Elena let the space sit empty for months. She would visit occasionally, staring at the bare walls and empty shelves, unable to imagine filling them with new work. The silence in the studio felt like a mockery of the creative energy that had once filled her life. One gray morning in early spring, 6 months after the fire, Elena found herself wandering through a park near her home. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. She was just walking because sitting in her empty apartment had become unbearable. Her feet led her to a children's playground where she sat on a bench, watching kids play in a sandbox. A little girl, maybe 4 years old, was completely absorbed in shaping sand with her hands. She wasn't trying to make anything recognizable or impressive. She was simply enjoying the feeling of the sand between her fingers, the pleasure of forming and reforming shapes that meant nothing to anyone but her. Her face was lit up with pure joy, completely present to the simple miracle of creation itself. The child would build small mountains and then smash them down, laughing with delight. She would dig holes and fill them again, patting the sand smooth with obvious satisfaction. She would scoop sand into her bucket and dump it out, creating temporary sculptures that she would immediately destroy and rebuild in different forms. Watching this child, Elena felt something stir in her chest that she hadn't experienced since before the fire. Not the ambition to create great art or the need to rebuild her reputation, but something much simpler and more fundamental: the pure love of shaping matter with her hands. The basic human impulse to create, not for recognition or achievement, but for the sheer joy of bringing something new into existence. That afternoon, Elena went to a local craft store and bought a small bag of clay. Not professional-grade pottery clay, just simple earthenware like children use in school. She took it home and sat at her kitchen table, with no plan, no artistic vision, no goal except to remember what it felt like to shape clay for the pure pleasure of shaping clay. As her hands worked the simple brown earth, Elena began to cry. But these weren't tears of grief for what she had lost. These were tears of recognition for what could never be lost. Her gift wasn't her ability to create beautiful objects that impressed critics and collectors. Her gift was her capacity to be present to the miracle of creation itself, to participate in the ongoing process of bringing form out of formlessness. She realized that she had never been creating beauty, she had been discovering it. Beauty wasn't something she possessed or produced or achieved through skill and technique. Beauty was the essence of existence itself, flowing through her hands, expressing itself through clay and fire and human attention. She wasn't the creator. She was creation, creating itself, consciousness exploring its own infinite creativity through the temporary vehicle of Elena's life and hands and artistic vision. From that day forward, Elena's relationship with pottery changed completely. Instead of trying to make something beautiful, she allowed beauty to make itself through her. Instead of creating art to prove her worth or build her reputation, she created because creation was her natural expression of gratitude for being alive. She rented a small studio space, much simpler than her previous elaborate setup. She bought basic equipment and a few bags of clay. She started making small, simple pieces, bowls and cups and plates, designed for daily use rather than museum display. Each piece was made with complete presence and attention, but without the pressure to create masterworks. Word began to spread about Elena's new work, not through galleries or critics, but through the people who used her pottery in their homes. There was something different about these pieces, something that went beyond technical excellence or artistic innovation. They seemed to carry a quality of presence, of love, of deep appreciation for the simple miracle of function and form. A local restaurant began using her bowls and plates, and customers constantly asked where they could buy similar pieces. A small gift shop started carrying her work, and it sold faster than anything else in the store. People would hold one of Elena's cups or bowls and feel somehow nourished by more than whatever they ate or drank from it. Elena's new pieces had a quality that her earlier, more ambitious work had never possessed. They seemed to glow with life itself, as if they contained some essence that transcended their physical form. They were simultaneously humble and magnificent, ordinary and sacred. The difference wasn't in technique. Elena's skills had always been exceptional. The difference was in intention and presence. She was no longer trying to prove anything or achieve anything. She was simply expressing the love and gratitude that flowed naturally when she was connected to her true nature. Museums began to take notice of this new work, recognizing that something significant was happening in Elena's art. But by then, Elena was no longer concerned with recognition or artistic legacy. She had discovered that the joy was in the making, not in the having. The fulfillment was in the process, not in the product. When people asked her about the fire and whether she missed her destroyed masterpieces, Elena would smile and say that the fire had been the greatest teacher of her life. It had shown her the difference between what could be destroyed and what was indestructible. It had revealed the difference between being an artist and being artistry itself. The fire hadn't destroyed Elena's true gift. It had revealed it. Her identity wasn't her art. Her identity was the creative force that expresses itself as art, as love, as service, as whatever form life calls for in each moment. She had thought she was a potter who made beautiful things. She discovered she was beauty itself, temporarily playing in clay. Elena's story illustrates a profound truth that every spiritual tradition recognizes in its own way. What we think we are, the roles we play, the achievements we accumulate, the identities we construct can be lost. But what we actually are, the consciousness that plays all roles, the awareness that witnesses all achievements, the love that creates all identities can never be diminished or destroyed. This doesn't mean you should seek out suffering or be grateful for trauma or pretend that loss doesn't hurt. It means you can trust that even your most painful experiences are not outside the love that you are. They're not punishment or proof that you're doing something wrong or evidence that the universe is cruel and random. They're part of the mysterious process through which consciousness knows itself more fully, loves itself more completely, expresses itself more authentically. When you're going through difficult times, when your heart is broken, when your world feels like it's falling apart, the practice isn't to understand why, or to find a silver lining, or to pretend everything happens for a reason. The practice is to stay present with what is, to offer yourself the same compassion you would offer a beloved friend, and to remember that your essential nature is untouched by anything that can happen to your body, your circumstances, or even your emotional experience. The awareness that's aware of your pain is not in pain. The love that you are is not diminished by loss. The peace that is your true nature is not disturbed by chaos. This isn't a philosophical concept to believe or a spiritual bypassing of genuine grief. This is a living reality to recognize and rest in, a truth that becomes more accessible the more you practice returning to it. Let me share one more story that brings together everything we've explored, because this story will help you understand both the ultimate nature of reality and how to live from that understanding in practical, everyday ways. It's the story I call the Cave of Echoes, and it will show you why you forgot who you were and how to remember. Imagine a group of people who were born and raised in a deep underground cave system. They've never seen sunlight, never experienced the world beyond their dark chambers. Their entire reality consists of shadows on the cave wall, cast by objects they've never seen, illuminated by a fire behind them that they're not aware of. To these cave dwellers, the shadows are reality. They develop elaborate explanations for why the shadows move the way they do. They create complex systems of meaning based on shadow patterns. They compete to be the best shadow interpreter. They build their identities around their ability to predict and understand shadow behavior. They suffer when the shadows don't behave according to their expectations. They celebrate when the shadows conform to their theories. Some become shadow scientists, developing sophisticated models to explain shadow movement. They publish papers on shadow dynamics, hold conferences on shadow theory, build reputations as leading experts in shadow interpretation. Others become shadow artists, finding beauty in particular shadow patterns, creating shadow-based music and poetry and drama. Still others become shadow philosophers, debating the ultimate meaning and purpose of shadow existence. All of them are completely convinced that the shadows are the fundamental nature of reality. When someone suggests that there might be something beyond the shadows, they're met with ridicule or dismissal. The shadow experts have built their entire careers on shadow interpretation. The shadow artists have invested their creative lives in shadow appreciation. The shadow philosophers have constructed elaborate worldviews based on shadow analysis. The cave dwellers develop shadow psychology to explain why some people seem troubled by shadow patterns. They create shadow medication to help people who are disturbed by shadow irregularities. They build shadow institutions to maintain order and meaning in their shadow-based society. They write shadow scriptures that promise better shadows in the afterlife for those who follow proper shadow viewing protocols. Now imagine that one day, one of these people somehow turns around and sees the fire that's creating all the shadows. At first, the light hurts their eyes. It's confusing, disorienting, overwhelming. Everything they thought they knew suddenly seems questionable. The shadows they thought were solid and real reveal themselves as mere projections. The elaborate theories they've constructed about shadow reality suddenly seem as substantial as those shadows themselves. But gradually, as their eyes adjust to the light, they begin to see not just the fire but the three-dimensional objects that are casting the shadows. They realize that the shadows they thought were ultimate reality are just two-dimensional projections of three-dimensional forms. What seemed mysterious and complex from the shadow perspective becomes simple and obvious when seen from the perspective of light. The person who has turned around experiences a complete revolution in understanding. The shadow dramas that once seemed so important now appear as entertainment. The shadow competitions that once generated such passion now seem like children's games. The shadow theories that once appeared so sophisticated now look like elaborate fantasies. But here's where the story becomes really interesting. Excited by this discovery, they turn back to their companions and try to explain what they've seen. But the others think they've gone mad. They can't see the fire because they're not looking in that direction. They can't understand the explanation because their entire conceptual framework is based on shadow reality. They're convinced that the shadows are fundamental truth, and anyone who says otherwise is deluded, dangerous, or trying to trick them. Some cave dwellers become angry at this suggestion that their reality isn't real. Their entire sense of identity and meaning is tied up in being good shadow interpreters. If shadows aren't ultimate reality, then their life's work has been meaningless. Others become fearful, worried that if the shadows aren't fundamental truth, then nothing can be trusted, nothing has meaning. Existence itself is uncertain. Still others become defensive, arguing passionately for the validity of their shadow-based worldview. They point to the elaborate institutions built on shadow interpretation, the sophisticated theories developed through shadow analysis, the beautiful art created from shadow inspiration. How could all of this be based on illusion? A few become curious, but when they try to turn around, the light seems too bright, too unfamiliar, too challenging to their established ways of understanding. It's easier to stay focused on the familiar shadows than to risk having their entire worldview overturned. This is the human condition. We're born into a world of shadows thinking they're reality, and we spend our lives trying to manipulate the shadows instead of turning toward the light that's creating them. We think our thoughts define who we are instead of seeing them as movements in consciousness. We think our emotions are problems to solve instead of recognizing them as temporary experiences in awareness. We think our circumstances determine our happiness instead of realizing that joy is our natural state when we're not focused on rearranging the shadows. The thoughts that move through your mind are like those shadows on the cave wall. They seem real, solid, significant. You develop elaborate strategies for managing them, controlling them, understanding them. You identify with them, thinking that you are your thoughts, that your worth depends on having the right thoughts or getting rid of the wrong thoughts. But thoughts are just shadows cast by the light of consciousness. They come and go, they change constantly, they have no permanent substance. The awareness that observes thoughts is like the fire in the cave, creating all the mental shadows but never itself becoming a shadow. Your emotions work the same way. Fear, anger, sadness, joy, they're all temporary experiences arising in the field of awareness, like weather patterns moving through the sky. You don't try to control the weather, and you don't identify yourself as the weather. You recognize that you are the sky in which all weather appears and disappears. Your circumstances, your relationships, your successes and failures, your gains and losses, all of these are shadows on the wall of experience. They seem incredibly important when you're focused on them exclusively, when you believe they define your reality. But when you turn toward the light of consciousness that's creating all experience, you realize that your peace and happiness never actually depended on arranging the shadows in any particular pattern. The light that's creating all the shadows of your experience is the consciousness that you are. When you turn toward that light, when you recognize that awareness itself is your true identity, everything changes. Not because the world becomes perfect, but because you stop needing it to be perfect in order for you to be at peace. You realize that you've been trying to find yourself in your achievements, your relationships, your experiences, but you are the space in which all achievements, relationships, and experiences appear. You've been looking for love in other people, but you are the love that makes all connections possible. You've been seeking purpose in external goals, but you are the consciousness through which all purpose is expressed. This is the great remembering. This is what it means to come home to yourself. This is why your searching can finally end. Not because you've found something new, but because you've recognized what was never lost. Now, how do you live from this understanding? How do you integrate this remembering into your daily life? How do you stay connected to the light while still functioning effectively in the world of shadows? Let me give you specific practices that will keep you rooted in truth no matter what's happening in your external circumstances. These aren't techniques to achieve some future state of enlightenment. These are ways of recognizing and expressing the enlightenment that's already here. Start each morning with what I call the gratitude recognition. Before you get out of bed, before you check your phone, before you start thinking about your day or getting caught up in the momentum of doing and achieving, take 3 minutes to recognize 3 fundamental truths. First, recognize that you're aware. Notice the simple fact of consciousness itself. Don't take this for granted. The awareness that's listening to these words right now is the most miraculous thing in existence. More amazing than any technological achievement, more beautiful than any work of art, more precious than any treasure. You are conscious. You are aware. You are the light in which all experience appears. Second, recognize that this awareness is naturally peaceful. Even if your thoughts are busy or your emotions are intense, the awareness that's aware of them remains naturally calm, like the sky remaining untroubled by storms that pass through it. You don't have to create this peace or earn it or achieve it. It's already here as the foundation of your being. Third, recognize that this peaceful awareness is not separate from love. Feel the inherent kindness that consciousness has toward all of its experiences. Notice how awareness never judges or rejects anything that appears in it. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, perceptions, all are welcomed equally. This unconditional acceptance is not something you have to practice. It's the natural quality of consciousness itself. This isn't positive thinking or gratitude practice in the usual sense. This is recognition of what's already true. You're not trying to create peace and love and awareness. You're acknowledging the peace and love and awareness that are already present as the foundation of your being. Throughout the day, whenever you remember, practice what I call the sacred pause. This is the most powerful spiritual practice I know, and it takes only 30 seconds. Stop whatever you're doing for just one moment. Take one conscious breath. Ask yourself this question: what is aware right now? Don't answer with your mind, don't make it complicated or turn it into a philosophical inquiry. Just rest in the awareness that naturally knows it's aware. This simple practice will keep you connected to your true identity, no matter how busy or challenging your day becomes. It will remind you that you are not the character in the drama of your life. You are the consciousness in which the drama appears. When you're dealing with difficult people or stressful situations, remember that everything you encounter is appearing in your awareness. The difficult person is a movement in consciousness. The stressful situation is an experience arising in awareness. The awareness that you are remains completely untroubled by any of these temporary appearances. This doesn't mean becoming passive or failing to respond appropriately to challenges. It means responding from the stability of your true nature rather than reacting from the turbulence of thoughts and emotions. When you're rooted in awareness, you naturally respond with wisdom, compassion, and appropriate action rather than reactivity, defensiveness, and drama. Practice loving awareness throughout your day. This means bringing the same gentle, accepting attention to whatever you're experiencing that a loving grandparent brings to watching their grandchildren play. Your emotions aren't problems to solve. They're experiences to welcome. Your thoughts aren't enemies to fight. They're movements in consciousness to observe with curiosity. When you find yourself getting caught in old patterns of worry or anger or sadness, don't try to change or fix the feeling. Don't judge yourself for having the experience. Don't add suffering to suffering by making your emotions into evidence that you're failing spiritually or doing something wrong. Just notice that you're aware of whatever you're experiencing. The awareness that knows you're worried is not worried. The awareness that observes your anger is not angry. The awareness that witnesses your sadness is not sad. Rest in that aware space, even while the emotion continues to move through you. That's your true home. End each day with what I call loving review. Before you fall asleep, review your day not to judge your performance or plan improvements, but to see where love was present. Notice the moments when you offered kindness, even in small ways. Recognize the instances when you received care from others. Acknowledge the times when beauty caught your attention: a sunset, a child's laughter, a moment of connection with a friend. See your day through the eyes of love, and you'll train your perception to recognize love's presence everywhere. You'll begin to see that even challenging experiences were opportunities to practice presence, patience, compassion. Even difficult people were teachers helping you discover deeper levels of acceptance and understanding. This practice of loving review will gradually transform your entire relationship with life. Instead of focusing on what went wrong or what needs to be fixed or improved, you'll start noticing the countless ways that love is already expressing itself through your ordinary existence. But remember, these practices aren't about becoming enlightened someday. They're about recognizing the enlightenment that's already here, the divinity that's already present, the love that you already are. You don't need to perfect these practices or do them flawlessly. You just need to remember to return to them whenever you remember to return to them. Every time you forget who you are and get lost in the drama of thoughts and emotions and circumstances, you have an opportunity to remember again. Every time you remember, you strengthen your capacity to stay awake. Every time you choose love over fear, presence over distraction, truth over illusion, you're not earning spiritual points or moving closer to some future awakening. You're simply expressing what you already are. The path isn't about becoming someone different. It's about recognizing who you've always been. It's not about achieving some special state. It's about acknowledging the specialness of your ordinary awareness. It's not about transcending your humanity. It's about discovering the divinity that was never separate from your humanity. My friend, we've traveled together through ancient wisdom that's as fresh as this moment, as immediate as your next breath, as available as your willingness to recognize what's already here. You've remembered what you've always known, that you are not separate from the love that created you, that your seeking ends when you realize you are what you were looking for, and that every experience, beautiful or challenging, is an invitation to return to this truth. This isn't the end of your journey, it's the beginning of living it consciously. The book that they tried to hide from you was never really hidden at all. It's written in every sunset, whispered in every act of kindness, revealed in every moment of stillness. It's the book of your own awakened heart, and you've been reading it your entire life without realizing it. Every time you've felt unexplainable peace in nature, you were reading from this book. Every time you've been moved to help someone without expecting anything in return, you were living from this book. Every time you've felt connected to something larger than your personal concerns, you were remembering the truth this book contains. The wisdom we've explored together isn't something you need to learn or achieve or earn. It's something you need to stop forgetting. You don't need to become enlightened. You need to recognize that you already are the light. You don't need to find God. You need to stop hiding from the divinity that you are. You don't need to earn love. You need to stop rejecting the love that you are. Take what resonates with you from everything we've shared. Leave what doesn't feel true to your experience. But most importantly, live what you know to be true. Don't just think about these ideas or believe in these concepts. Embody them. Express them. Let them transform how you show up in the world. The world is waiting for your unique expression of this ancient love. Not waiting for you to become someone different or achieve some special state, but waiting for you to remember who you've always been and let that truth shine through your ordinary life. Every act of kindness, every moment of presence, every choice to respond with love instead of fear is a gift to the whole world. You are here not by accident, but by divine appointment. Your life, with all its struggles and triumphs, its confusions and clarities, its questions and discoveries, is exactly the curriculum your soul chose for remembering itself. Trust the process. Trust your experience. Trust the love that brought you into existence and that will never abandon you. If these words have stirred something true within you, if they've reminded you of what you've always known but sometimes forget, then please subscribe to this channel for more wisdom that remembers you to yourself. Hit the like button if this touched your heart. Your engagement helps other seekers find what they're really looking for, and every person who remembers their true nature adds more light to a world that desperately needs it. And please, share in the comments how this truth is alive in your life. Tell us about the moments when you've experienced the peace that passes understanding, the love that asks for nothing in return, the joy that doesn't depend on circumstances. Your story might be exactly what another soul needs to hear to remember their own divinity. We're all walking each other home, all helping each other remember what we've temporarily forgotten. Your awakening serves everyone's awakening because there's only one consciousness appearing as many, only one love expressing itself through countless forms, only one truth wearing billions of different faces. Until we meet again in words or in the silence beyond words, remember this above all else. You are the love you've been seeking. You are the peace you've been chasing. You are the truth you've been questioning. You are the light you've been praying to. You always have been. You always will be. And nothing that has ever happened or ever could happen can change this fundamental truth of your being. You are home. You have always been home. Welcome to the rest of your life lived from this remembering.